My name is Frances Townsend. And 4 years ago, my father looked me straight in the eyes and decided I wasn't worth investing in. Not emotionally, financially. Like I was a failed business proposal sitting across from him in our living room instead of his daughter. 2 weeks ago, that same man sat in the front row of Whitmore University's graduation ceremony with a camera in his hands and pride written all over his face. Not for me, for my twin sister. He had no idea I was graduating too. He definitely didn't know I was the valedictorian. And he absolutely did not know that in less than 20 minutes, I'd walk onto that stage in front of 3,000 people and repeat the exact sentence he said to me 4 years earlier. Word for word, but this story doesn't begin at graduation. It begins during the spring of 2021 inside my parents' living room. The acceptance letters arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. Victoria screamed first. Whitmore University, private, prestigious, expensive enough that people said the name differently once you got accepted there. I remember Mom crying immediately while Dad stood behind Victoria reading the letter over her shoulder like she just secured the family legacy personally. Then I opened mine, Eastbrook State, solid business program, public university, actually realistic financially. Honestly, I was excited. At that point, I still believed my parents saw me and Victoria equally. God. That version of me feels painfully naive now. That evening, Dad called a family financial meeting, which already sounded ominous because Harold Townsend treated emotional conversations like quarterly shareholder reports. Dad sat in his leather chair. Mom folded her hands beside him on the couch. Victoria practically vibrated with excitement near the fireplace. And me, I sat there clutching my acceptance packet so tightly the edges bent. Dad cleared his throat once. "Victoria," he said, "your mother and I will be covering your full tuition at Whitmore." Victoria gasped. Mom smiled instantly. Then Dad turned toward me, and just like that, the atmosphere changed. "Frances," he continued calmly, "we've decided not to fund your education." For a second, I genuinely thought I misunderstood him. "I'm sorry, what?" Dad leaned back in the chair like this conversation was already settled. "Whitmore is an investment with long-term value," he explained. "Victoria has exceptional social instincts, leadership qualities, networking potential. Networking potential. Interesting phrase to use about your daughter while denying your other child an education." Dad continued, "She'll build relationships that matter. She understands people. She presents well." Then came the sentence that stayed inside my chest for 4 years. "You're smart, Frances, but you're not special." Silence, real silence. The kind where your entire body hears the words before your brain processes them. Dad shrugged slightly. "There's no meaningful return on investment with you, God." I still remember the exact sound the air conditioner made afterward. That low humming noise filling the room while my entire world rearranged itself quietly around me. I looked at Mom first. Diane Townsend avoided my eyes completely. Then I looked at Victoria. My twin sister was texting someone under the coffee table, probably telling her friends about Whitmore. She didn't even realize my life had just split in half beside her. "So what?" I asked slowly. "I'm supposed to figure it out alone?" Dad nodded once. "You're resourceful," like it was a compliment. "You'll manage." Manage, interesting word. People use it when they want survival to sound empowering instead of neglectful. That night, I sat alone in my bedroom staring at the cracked laptop Victoria used for 3 years before handing it down to me. The battery lasted 40 minutes if I was lucky. One hinge barely worked. And suddenly that laptop felt symbolic somehow. Not new enough to invest in, not valuable enough to prioritize, just functional enough to keep around. Like me, the thing is, this wasn't sudden. The favoritism had existed my entire life. When we turned 16, Victoria got a brand new Honda Civic with a giant red bow on top. I got her old laptop. When Victoria wanted a summer abroad program in Spain, my parents paid immediately. When I needed SAT prep books, Dad told me libraries existed for a reason. Family vacations were worse. Victoria always got the proper hotel room. I got pull-out couches. One year in Colorado, I slept inside what the resort literally described online as a cozy converted storage nook. It was a closet. A decorated closet. Mom called it making the budget work. Interesting how budgets only became important around me. At 17, I finally asked mom directly if they loved Victoria more. God. I remember how quickly she answered. Francis, don't be dramatic. Dramatic? That word follows emotionally neglected daughters everywhere. You girls are loved equally. But actions have weight words can't survive forever. A few months before the college conversation, I found mom's phone unlocked on the kitchen counter accidentally. I wasn't trying to snoop, really, but the message was already open. A conversation with Aunt Linda. And one sentence changed everything. Poor Francis, but Harold's right, we have to be practical like I was an expense, a burden, a weak investment portfolio. That night, something inside me finally stopped begging to be chosen. And honestly, that saved my life. At 2:13 a.m., sitting cross-legged on my bedroom floor beside that broken laptop, I opened Google and typed, "Full scholarships for independent students." The search results loaded painfully slowly. But somewhere between scholarship databases and financial aid forums, my future quietly began rebuilding itself. I found Eastbrook's merit program first, full tuition coverage for 5 students annually. 5. The odds were terrible. Then I found another name, Whitfield Scholarship. 20 students nationwide, full ride, living stipend, partner universities. I actually laughed out loud reading it, because honestly, it sounded impossible. But impossible was still better than becoming exactly what my father expected me to become. Forgettable. So that night, while the rest of my family slept peacefully upstairs, I made a decision nobody would understand for years. If I wasn't worth investing into them, I'd become someone undeniable without them. That summer became mathematics, not emotions, not dreams, numbers. Every hour of my life had to calculate correctly or college simply wouldn't happen. I bought a black spiral notebook from Dollar Tree and filled every page with survival plans. Tuition, rent, food, gas, books. I broke my future down into exact dollar amounts because numbers felt safer than hope. Hope had failed me already. Dad contributed exactly $0 toward my education, not reduced support, not partial help. Nothing. Meanwhile, Victoria's Whitmore tuition checks were discussed openly during dinner like family achievements. $65,000 a year, Dad said proudly one night. But opportunities like Whitmore pay for themselves. Interesting, because apparently I was the only Townsend child expected to generate profit projections before deserving support. By August, my schedule looked borderline inhuman. 5 a.m. to 8 a.m. barista shift at morning grind, 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. classes, 5 p.m. to 10 p.m. library, job, or studying, then homework until around midnight, sleep if possible, repeat. I found a room off campus in a rundown house shared with 4 other students, $300 monthly, utilities included. No air conditioning. The landlord called it cozy student housing. Interesting how poor living conditions always get marketed with cheerful adjectives. My room barely fit the mattress. The window overlooked a brick wall, and honestly, I loved it immediately, because for the first time in my life, a space belonged entirely to me. Move-in day arrived 2 weeks before classes started. Victoria's send-off looked like a movie scene. New luggage, professional dorm daycare. Family photos in matching college colors. Dad rented an SUV just to transport all her things to Whitmore. Meanwhile, I loaded my entire life into the backseat of Rebecca Miller's 15-year-old Corolla. Rebecca had been my best friend since sophomore year. Sharp sarcasm, messy blonde ponytail, zero tolerance for self-pity. "You ready?" she asked while helping shove my second-hand mini fridge into the trunk. "No," I answered honestly. "Good," Rebecca said. "That means you understand how terrifying adulthood is." God, I loved her for making hard things funny. Mom hugged me before I left, quickly, like she felt obligated to. "Call if you need anything." Interesting sentence considering everyone already knew I wouldn't. Dad stood near the garage checking something on his phone. "Eastbrook's a good school," he said casually. "If you work hard, maybe you'll transfer somewhere better eventually." Maybe. Even my success had conditions attached. Victoria hugged me last. She smelled like expensive perfume and excitement. "We should totally visit each other." Totally. People say things like that when they don't understand some relationships survive mostly through proximity. Once distance enters, truth usually follows. The drive to Eastbrook took 3 hours. I spent most of it staring out the passenger window, trying not to think about how different Victoria's life would look from mine by this time tomorrow. Whitmore orientation probably included catered dinners and networking events. Eastbrook gave us campus maps printed on cheap paper and a free pen that barely worked. Honestly, I still kept the pen, because everything mattered when you built your life alone. Freshman year hit like a truck immediately. The cafe shift started at 5 o'clock a.m., which meant waking up at 4:15 every morning while the rest of campus slept. By 7 o'clock a.m., I smelled permanently like espresso beans and exhaustion. Then classes. Then studying, then library shifts. I stopped measuring days emotionally, only functionally. Did I finish assignments? Did I make rent? Did I survive this week good enough? There were nights I sat on the floor of my tiny room eating instant ramen directly from the pot because washing extra dishes wasted time. One night, the electricity went out during a thunderstorm. I finished an economics paper by flashlight while rain hammered the roof above me. And weirdly, I remember feeling proud. Because every miserable, exhausting moment belonged to me, not my parents, not their approval. Mind. Thanksgiving freshman year was the first real fracture. Campus emptied almost completely. Everyone went home. I stayed. Plane tickets cost money I didn't have. Gas cost money I didn't have. Existing cost money I barely had. So on Thanksgiving night, I sat alone in my room with microwave mac and cheese while listening to rain hit the windows softly outside. Around 8 o'clock p.m., I finally called home. Mom answered distractedly. Background noise flooded through the phone immediately. Laughter, dishes clinking, football on television, the sound of family. "Hi, honey, happy Thanksgiving. You too, sweetheart." Her voice already sounded elsewhere mentally. I swallowed once. "Can I talk to Dad?" Small pause, then muffled movement. And in the background, I heard my father say, "Tell her I'm busy." God, that sentence hurt more than the college conversation somehow. Because this wasn't financial anymore, this was personal. Mom returned awkwardly. "Your father's entertaining guests right now." Guests. Interesting, apparently strangers ranked above me too. "It's okay," I said quietly. "You eating enough?" I looked down at the ramen cup beside me. "Yeah, good." Another silence. Then, "We love you." I almost laughed, not because it was funny, because sometimes words become so disconnected from behavior they stop sounding real. "Love you too." I hung up, then opened Facebook immediately afterward like an idiot. Victoria had just posted family Thanksgiving photos. Dad carving turkey, Mom smiling beside him, Victoria holding wine glasses dramatically. The caption, "Thankful for MY, amazing family," read. I zoomed into the picture slowly. 3 plates, 3 chairs, not 4, they hadn't even set a place for me. And suddenly something inside me changed permanently. Not dramatically. Quietly, like a door closing softly somewhere deep inside my chest. The painful, desperate need for my parents' approval finally started dying that night. And in the empty space it left behind, something much stronger began growing instead. Clarity. Second semester freshman year, I met the woman who changed my life. Dr. Margaret Smith terrified almost everyone at Eastbrook. 30 years teaching economics, published internationally. Reputation for destroying lazy students publicly. People whispered she hadn't given an A in years. The first day of microeconomics 101, she walked into class wearing a charcoal blazer and the expression of someone already disappointed in humanity. "Half of you," she announced immediately, "will not survive this course." God, I loved her instantly, not because she was harsh, because she sounded honest. I sat in the 3rd row every lecture taking obsessive notes while balancing coffee shop shifts and 4 hours of sleep nightly. Most students disappeared by mid-semester. I stayed. One night around 1 o'clock a.m., I finished a policy analysis paper inside the library basement after working a 6-hour shift shelving books. My hands were shaking from exhaustion while printing it. Honestly, I expected maybe a B when Dr. Smith handed essays back 3 days later. Mine had a plus written across the top in sharp red ink, underneath the grade. "See me after class?" My stomach dropped instantly. Rebecca noticed immediately. "You look like you got subpoenaed." "I think Dr. Smith hates my paper. She gave you an A+. That somehow feels worse." After class ended, students escaped the room quickly while Dr. Smith organized papers at her desk without looking up. Frances Townsend. Yes, ma'am. Sit. So I sat. God, I was genuinely nervous. Dr. Smith adjusted her reading glasses slowly while flipping through my essay. This, she said finally, is one of the best undergraduate analyses I've read in 20 years. For a second, I thought she confused me with another student. I'm sorry, she looked up directly. Where were you trained? Trained? Yes, debate programs, private prep academy, academic mentorship. I almost laughed. Public school and insomnia. And for the first time, Dr. Margaret Smith smiled slightly. Tiny smile, but real. What's your family background academically? There it was, the question, and honestly, I don't fully know why I answered truthfully. Maybe exhaustion, maybe loneliness. Maybe I was tired of pretending everything was normal. My family doesn't support my education. The words escaped before I could stop them. Dr. Smith stayed quiet, not uncomfortable quiet, listening quiet. So I told her everything. The scholarships, the jobs, the financial rejection, the bad investment speech. I didn't cry, didn't dramatize it, just facts. By the end, Dr. Smith had stopped taking notes entirely. Then she asked softly, "And you're maintaining a 4 through all this?" I shrugged slightly. What other option do I have? God, something changed in her expression right then. Recognition, maybe. Like she suddenly understood I wasn't working hard for ambition anymore. I was working hard for survival. Dr. Smith leaned back carefully. Have you heard of the Whitfield Scholarship? Immediately my stomach tightened. Of course I'd heard of it. 20 students nationwide, near impossible odds, basically academic mythology. I know about it. And I know people like me don't get it. Wrong answer. Dr. Smith's face hardened instantly. People like you, I looked down, students without connections. She closed the file in front of her sharply. Frances, let me explain something to you very clearly. Her voice lowered. Students with connections are common. Then after a pause, students with your discipline are not. God, nobody had ever spoken about me like that before, not once in my entire life. Dr. Smith stood and walked toward a bookshelf lining the office wall. When she returned, she placed a thick folder in front of me. Whitfield Foundation Application Guide. Read it carefully. I stared at her. The acceptance rate is impossible. Yes. You think I actually have a chance? Dr. Smith crossed her arms. I think your family trained you to underestimate yourself professionally. Silence, because honestly, that landed harder than anything she said before. Then she added quietly, don't continue their work for them. God, I still think about that sentence sometimes. Don't continue their work for them. I walked back to my apartment that night carrying the Whitfield folder like it contained state secrets. The February air stung my face. Snow lined the sidewalks. Campus lights blurred softly through freezing fog. And for the first time since arriving at Eastbrook, I allowed myself to imagine something bigger than survival. Not revenge, not proving my parents wrong. A future. The application process consumed the next year of my life completely. 10 essays, leadership evaluations, academic interviews, recommendation letters. Meanwhile, regular life kept happening too. 5 a.m. coffee shifts, library work, exams, rent. There were weeks I barely remembered my own name from exhaustion. Once I fainted during a cafe shift while steaming milk. The campus clinic doctor asked how much sleep I averaged nightly. I lied immediately. 6 hours. Rebecca snorted so loudly from the chair beside me the nurse looked alarmed. Try 4, she corrected. God, Rebecca saved me constantly in tiny, invisible ways. She brought groceries when my bank account hit 0. Pretended movie nights counted as mental health breaks. Forced me outside occasionally so I remembered sunlight existed. One December night she found me crying silently in my car outside the library. Nothing dramatic had happened. That was the problem. Everything had happened for too long. Rebecca climbed into the passenger seat beside me without asking questions, then quietly handed me fries. Here, I laughed through tears immediately. What am I supposed to do with these? Have a breakdown with potassium. God, that girl deserved sainthood. Junior year, Dr. Smith officially nominated me for Whitfield. I remember staring at the email for almost 10 straight minutes. Finalist consideration initiated, my hands physically shook. 20 students nationwide, 20. Meanwhile, my family still barely remembered to call me on holidays. Funny how strangers sometimes see your value more clearly than blood relatives ever do. The first round interview happened over Zoom. The second involved essays about leadership and resilience. Interesting topic considering most of my resilience came from emotional neglect. Then came the final round invitation. In-person interview, New York City. I checked my bank account immediately, $847. The bus ticket alone would destroy my budget for the month. I almost declined. Honestly, then Rebecca saw the email. Absolutely not, she said immediately. I can't afford this. You can't afford not to go. It's irresponsible financially. Rebecca grabbed my shoulders dramatically. Frances Townsend, listen to me carefully. Her voice softened. You have spent 3 years surviving. This is the first chance you've had to actually change your life. God, that sentence hit hard because she was right. Survival and possibility are not the same thing. So 2 days later, I boarded an overnight bus to Manhattan carrying one borrowed blazer, one backpack, and every fragile future I'd built from nothing. The bus ride to New York took 9 hours. 9 loud, uncomfortable, exhausting hours beside a man who snored like construction equipment and a crying toddler 3 rows behind me. I barely slept, not because of the noise. Because every time I closed my eyes, I heard my father's voice again. No meaningful return on investment. God, amazing how certain sentences attach themselves permanently to your nervous system. We arrived in Manhattan just after 5 o'clock a.m. Gray sky, cold wind, streetlights still glowing against glass skyscrapers. I stepped off the bus carrying my backpack and immediately felt underdressed for the entire city. Everyone moved fast, confident fast, the kind of fast that makes you feel poor instantly. I found a public restroom inside the terminal and changed into Rebecca's borrowed blazer, navy blue, slightly too big in the shoulders. Still the nicest thing I owned. Then I looked at myself in the mirror. Second-hand shoes, dark circles beneath my eyes, hair pulled back too tightly. Honestly, I looked terrified. Good, that meant the opportunity mattered. The Whitfield Foundation headquarters occupied the top floors of a building so expensive-looking I felt guilty touching the door handles. Inside the waiting room sat 14 other finalists. Designer handbags, perfect suits. Parents nearby offering encouragement quietly. One girl casually mentioned summering in Switzerland during conversation. Another discussed her internship at her uncle's hedge fund, and me. I was calculating whether my debit card could survive buying airport coffee later. For about 10 straight minutes, insecurity swallowed me whole. I don't belong here. Then Dr. Smith's voice echoed through my memory clearly. You don't need to belong, you need to deserve it. So I straightened my shoulders and walked inside the interview room. 3 panelists sat across a polished conference table. 1 older woman, 2 men in tailored suits. A 4th chair near the window remained empty. The older woman smiled politely. Frances Townsend? Yes, ma'am. Please sit. My hands shook slightly while setting down my portfolio. The panel began traditionally enough: academic goals, leadership experience, economic policy interests. Then one interviewer leaned forward. You maintained a 4 GPA while working 3 jobs? Yes. How? Interesting question, because honestly, I didn't know how to explain survival to people who'd never needed it. I treated school like oxygen, I answered quietly. Silence, not awkward silence, focused silence. The interviewer tilted his head slightly. What does that mean? I swallowed once. It means failure wasn't financially survivable. God, something shifted in the room immediately, not pity, recognition. One panelist flipped through my file. You wrote in your essay that your greatest obstacle wasn't poverty. No. What was it? I looked down briefly at my hands, then answered truthfully. Believing I deserved opportunities in the first place. The room went still, because that's the thing about emotional neglect, it doesn't just take resources. It teaches you your dreams are unreasonable before you even try reaching them. The older woman studied me carefully. Who taught you that? My father, but I didn't say that. Instead, my environment? She nodded slowly like she understood more than I'd actually said aloud. Then came the final question. If selected as a Whitfield scholar, one interviewer asked, what would success mean to you? Interesting. Because 2 years earlier, I would have answered differently. I would have talked about proving myself, proving my family wrong, finally being enough. But somewhere between exhaustion and survival, my definition changed. Freedom, I answered quietly. The interviewer blinked. Freedom? Yes. I took a breath. The freedom to build a life that isn't shaped by whether other people think I deserve it. Silence again, then the older woman smiled softly. Real smile this time, and suddenly, for the first time that entire day, I stopped feeling small. The interview ended 20 minutes later. As I gathered my backpack, the older woman stopped me gently. Francis, yes, you carry yourself like someone who's had to earn every inch of space she occupies. God, that sentence nearly broke me emotionally right there, because yes, exactly that. Outside the building, Manhattan buzzed around me in giant, overwhelming waves. Taxis, steam rising from subway grates, people shouting into phones. I walked 6 blocks before finally sitting on a bench near Bryant Park. Then I cried, not graceful crying, ugly, exhausted crying. Because regardless of the scholarship outcome, for 1 hour inside that building, people had looked at me like I mattered. Not as Victoria's twin, not as the disappointing daughter. As me. The decision email arrived 3 weeks later. I was halfway through a 5 a.m. cafe shift when my phone buzzed in my apron pocket. WHITFIELD Foundation, final decision. My entire body froze. The espresso machine hissed loudly behind me while customers moved around the counter impatiently. I couldn't breathe. Francis, my manager snapped, either answer your phone or make the latte. I walked straight outside into the freezing October air before opening the email. Dear Miss Townsend, we are pleased to inform you that was it. I stopped reading immediately because my vision blurred completely. I had 20 students nationwide, and somehow I was one of them. God. I sat down directly on the sidewalk outside morning grind and sobbed so hard strangers stared openly. 3 years of fear. 3 years of ramen dinners. 3 years of believing survival was the highest thing I deserved. All collapsing at once. Rebecca arrived 20 minutes later after I called her, crying incoherently. She jumped out of her car still wearing pajamas and tackled me into a hug right there on the sidewalk. You did it. People definitely thought we were insane. Honestly, we probably were. That night Dr. Smith called personally. I knew it, she said immediately. No, I laughed through tears. You hoped it. Same thing. Then her voice shifted slightly. There's something else you should know. My stomach tightened instantly. Whitfield scholars had access to partner universities for final year transfers, elite schools, private institutions, networking pipelines, and one name on the list changed the air in my lungs completely. Whitmore University, Victoria's school. I sat upright slowly. Wait, Dr. Smith continued carefully. If you transfer for senior year, you'll graduate through Whitmore's honors program. God, I already knew where this was going. The valedictorian gives commencement. Silence, complete silence. Then softly, you'd be speaking at graduation? My heart started pounding violently. Not from revenge, honestly, something stranger, like fate suddenly arranging itself too perfectly. Dr. Smith lowered her voice. You don't have to make this decision emotionally. But deep down, I already had. I transferred to Whitmore 3 months later, and I told nobody in my family, not moms, not dads, not even Victoria, honestly. At first, it wasn't intentional. I just didn't want their reactions attached to something I earned myself. Whitmore felt like another planet compared to Eastbrook. Stone buildings covered in ivy. Students discussing internships over $12 coffee. Designer coats everywhere. The campus practically smelled expensive. Meanwhile, I arrived carrying 1 suitcase, Rebecca's blazer, and a lifetime of feeling out of place in wealthy rooms. The Whitfield Foundation covered tuition and housing, but emotionally, I still felt like an imposter constantly. My dorm alone was larger than my entire old apartment room at Eastbrook. The first night there, I sat on the edge of the mattress staring at the skyline through giant windows, wondering how many versions of myself had to die for me to reach this place. Then classes started. And honestly, Whitmore students weren't smarter, they were just less afraid. That realization changed everything. People raised with support move through opportunities differently. They ask questions confidently, speak before certainty, assume they belong. Meanwhile, students like me spend years apologizing for occupying space. But Whitfield scholars had reputations already. Professors noticed us immediately, doors opened faster, networking invitations appeared. Recruiters actually learned my name. For the first time in my life, potential wasn't theoretical anymore. It was visible. 3 weeks into the semester, I was studying in the library when I heard a familiar voice behind me. Oh my God, every muscle in my body froze instantly. Victoria, I looked up slowly. My twin sister stood 6 feet away holding an iced latte and staring at me like she'd seen a ghost. Frances, God. The shock on her face almost made me laugh. Hi, Victoria. What are you doing here? Interesting question considering technically we attended the same university now. I go here. How? Straight to the important part, of course. Mom and Dad didn't say anything? They don't know. Silence. Victoria blinked repeatedly. What do you mean they don't know? Exactly what I said. She sat across from me automatically still staring. But Dad said you couldn't afford private schools? Interesting. Even now she quoted him like financial reality itself came from our father. I couldn't, I answered calmly. Then I earned a scholarship. Victoria frowned slightly. What scholarship? The Whitfield? God, I will never forget her expression. Confusion first, then recognition, then genuine disbelief. The Whitfield scholarship, I nodded once. That's impossible to get. Apparently not. Victoria stared at me for several seconds without speaking. Then quietly, why didn't you tell anyone? I looked down at the constitutional law textbook in front of me. Honestly. Because some victories feel safer before other people touch them. But what I said aloud was simpler. Did anyone ask? Silence, heavy silence, because we both knew the answer. No, nobody had asked how I survived, how I paid rent. Whether I ate properly, not once in almost 4 years. Victoria looked smaller somehow sitting across from me, not cruel, not arrogant, just suddenly aware. Frances, she said quietly, do you hate us? Us, interesting word. Because suddenly family became collective the moment consequences arrived emotionally. I closed the textbook carefully. No, and honestly, I meant it. Hate requires emotional energy I no longer had. I just stopped waiting for you to notice me. God, that landed hard. Victoria's eyes filled immediately, but before she could answer, I stood and gathered my books. I have class. Wait, she grabbed my sleeve lightly. What do I tell Mom and Dad? I looked at her hand for a second, then at her face. Whatever you want. That night my phone exploded with missed calls. Mom, Dad, Victoria again. I silenced every single one. Because after 4 years of surviving alone, I'd earned the right to choose when conversations happened. Dad finally reached me the next morning. First call from him in nearly 3 years. I almost ignored it. Almost. Frances, his voice sounded controlled, too controlled. Hi, Dad. Victoria says you transferred to Whitmore. She's observant. Silence immediately. Why didn't you tell us? Interesting question from a man who never once asked how I afforded Eastbrook. I didn't think it mattered to you. Of course it matters. Does it really, or does public perception matter? Dad exhaled sharply. How are you paying for Whitmore? There it was, the real question. The Whitfield scholarship. Silence again. Longer this time. Then finally, that's extremely competitive. God, that tiny hint of surprise in his voice hurt more than open cruelty somehow. Like success from me still felt statistically unlikely to him. Yes, when were you planning to tell us? I leaned back slowly in my chair. The morning sunlight through my apartment window suddenly felt very sharp. Probably never. Frances? No, Dad. My voice stayed calm, dangerously calm. You told me 4 years ago I wasn't worth investing in. Silence. Dead silence. Then, I don't remember saying that. God, that sentence nearly broke something inside me because I remembered every word, every pause, every expression. You said there was no return on investment with me. Nothing. I remember, Dad inhaled slowly. That conversation happened years ago. Yes, and I survived it. Another silence. Then finally, we'll discuss this at graduation. Graduation. Interesting, because he still thought the story ended with Victoria. I'll see you there, I answered quietly. Then I hung up first. That mattered more than it should have. Afterward, I sat alone in my Whitmore apartment staring out the window while the city moved below me in soft gray motion. And honestly, for the first time, I realized something important. My father still thought graduation would be Victoria's moment. He still believed he understood the shape of my life. He had no idea what was coming, and somehow that made everything feel strangely peaceful. Graduation arrived on a perfect Saturday morning in May. Bright blue sky, warm air, the kind of weather universities probably order in advance for brochures. Whitmore's stadium seated over 3,000 people. By 8:30 a.m., families flooded through the gates carrying flowers, balloons, cameras, and oversized pride. I entered through the faculty corridor quietly. No dramatic reveal, no secret music swelling in the background. Just me walking alone in graduation heels trying not to throw up from nerves. My regalia looked different from most students. Standard black gown, yes, but across my shoulders rested the gold valedictorian sash. Pinned near my collar sat the Whitfield Scholar medallion. Heavy bronze, cold against my skin. I touched it once while waiting backstage. Not for luck, for grounding. Because 4 years earlier I'd sat on my bedroom floor beside a cracked laptop believing my future ended before it started. And now I was about to address 3,000 people. God, life is strange sometimes. A coordinator guided honor students toward reserved seating near the stage. And that's when I saw them. Front row, dead center, my parents. Dad wore his navy suit, the expensive one reserved for important occasions. Mom clutched a massive bouquet of roses. And beside them sat Victoria smiling brightly while adjusting her graduation cap for photos. They looked so happy, so proud of her. There was even an empty seat beside Mom, not for me, probably for purses and jackets. Interesting how perfectly symbolic that felt. Dad adjusted his camera lens repeatedly while scanning the graduate sections for Victoria. He looked excited, genuinely excited, and honestly, that hurt more than bitterness would have. Because my father absolutely could love proudly, he just never chose to do it with me. I sat 20 feet away in the honors section. They never looked up once. The ceremony began slowly. Welcome speeches, honorary mentions, faculty introductions. Time stretched strangely inside the heat and noise. I barely heard anything. My heartbeat drowned out most of the morning. Then the university president returned to the podium. And now, God. My stomach flipped instantly. It is my honor to introduce this year's valedictorian and Whitfield Scholar. In the front row, Dad lifted his camera automatically toward Victoria's section. Mom smiled expectantly. Neither of them understood yet. This student has demonstrated extraordinary academic excellence, resilience, and leadership throughout her time at Whitmore University. My hands started shaking slightly. The president smiled toward the honors section. Please welcome Francis Townsend. Silence. One suspended impossible second of total silence. Then I stood, and everything changed. Dad's camera froze halfway upward. Mom's bouquet slipped sideways from her lap. Victoria's entire body jerked toward the stage. Confusion hit their faces first, then recognition, then shock so complete it almost looked painful physically. God. I will never forget that moment for the rest of my life. Not because they looked embarrassed, because for the first time ever they were actually seeing me, really seeing me, not as Victoria's quieter twin. Not as the resourceful daughter expected to manage alone. Me, I walked toward the podium slowly while 3,000 people applauded around us. My heels clicked sharply against the stage floor. The gold sash swayed against my gown, and in the front row, my father looked completely shattered. Not angry, lost, like reality had suddenly rearranged itself too fast for him to catch up. I reached the microphone, adjusted it once. The applause faded gradually, and suddenly the entire stadium fell silent. 3,000 people waiting. My parents staring at me like strangers. Then I spoke. Good morning, everyone. My voice sounded calm somehow. Steadier than I felt. 4 years ago, I was told I wasn't worth the investment. God, Mom's hand flew over her mouth instantly. Dad's face lost all color. And just like that, the truth entered the room publicly, not screaming, not accusing, simply existing where nobody could ignore it anymore. I continued carefully. I was told there was no meaningful return in supporting someone like me. The stadium stayed completely silent, not uncomfortable silence. Listening silence. So I told them everything. Not names. Never names, I didn't need to. I spoke about exhaustion. About working 3 jobs while carrying full course loads. About instant ramen dinners and secondhand textbooks. About what it feels like when the people who should believe in you first don't. And God, the strangest part, I wasn't angry anymore. That surprised even me. Because standing there beneath sunlight and applause, I finally understood something important. My success no longer belonged to my parents' approval, it belonged to me. I learned something during those years, I said into the microphone softly. You can survive being underestimated. Silence. You can survive rejection. A few people in the audience wiped tears already. But eventually, you stop building your life around proving other people wrong. I looked out across the stadium slowly, at graduates, families, friends holding signs, then finally toward the front row. I am here today not because someone believed in me first. God, Dad looked like he physically couldn't breathe. But because I eventually learned to believe in myself. The applause hit like thunder. People stood immediately, then more. Then nearly the entire stadium rose into a standing ovation around me, 3,000 people cheering. And in the middle of all that noise, my parents sat frozen in absolute silence. The standing ovation lasted almost 30 seconds. 30 overwhelming, surreal seconds of applause crashing through the stadium while I stood behind the podium trying not to cry. Not because I felt victorious. Because for the first time in my entire life, I felt visible, really visible. I stepped away from the microphone slowly while faculty members shook my hand and photographers snapped pictures from below the stage. Somewhere in the crowd, I heard Rebecca screaming loud enough to embarrass entire bloodlines. God, I loved that woman. As I descended the stage stairs, someone intercepted me near the bottom. James Whitfield III himself. Silver hair. Perfect suit. The kind of calm confidence wealth creates over generations. He extended his hand immediately. Miss Townsend, he said warmly, that was one of the finest commencement speeches I've heard in years. I shook his hand carefully, still half in shock. Thank you. No, he answered. Thank you. Then more quietly, students like you are exactly why this foundation exists. God, I nearly lost composure right there. Because after spending years feeling like an emotional burden, being described as the reason opportunity should exist felt almost impossible to process. Then I saw movement across the reception lawn. My family. Approaching slowly through the crowd. Dad first, Mom close behind him, Victoria lingering several feet back looking uncertain. Interesting. Even after everything, we still moved emotionally in the exact same formation. Dad reached me first, and honestly, he looked older, not physically, emotionally, like the last hour had collapsed something inside him permanently. Francis, his voice sounded rough, unsteady. Why didn't you tell us? Interesting first question. Not how did you survive? Were you okay? Are you happy? Why didn't you tell us? I accepted a glass of sparkling water from a passing server before answering. Did you ever ask? Silence. Dad opened his mouth, closed it. Mom stepped forward immediately, mascara streaked beneath her eyes. Baby, we're so sorry. God, that word almost hurt more than the speech. Baby. Like she suddenly remembered motherhood publicly once success made me visible. You knew, I answered quietly. Mom blinked. What? You knew I was struggling. Silence again. He told me I wasn't worth investing in. Dad inhaled sharply. Francis, I know. My voice stayed calm. That was the important part, not emotional, not explosive. Certain. You paid nearly $250,000 for Victoria's education. Victoria flinched visibly beside them. And you told me to survive alone. Dad's jaw tightened immediately. I made mistakes. Interesting phrase. Mistakes sound accidental. Systematic favoritism isn't accidental. It wasn't one mistake. Silence. People nearby had started pretending not to listen while very obviously listening. Champagne glasses paused midair. Conversations slowed nearby. Because honestly, watching wealthy, respectable parents confront the consequences of emotional neglect publicly makes people deeply uncomfortable. Mom reached for my arm softly. Please come home this summer so we can talk properly. Home, interesting word, because home is supposed to be the place you're safest being loved. I have a job in New York, I answered. Dad blinked. A job, Morrison and Associates. That got his attention immediately, one of the top consulting firms in Manhattan. I watched recognition hit him in real time, not because he suddenly understood me emotionally. Because now he understood my value professionally. God, that realization hurt more than I expected. Dad straightened slightly. That's extremely competitive. There it was again, surprise, like competence from me still required explanation. Yes, Mom looked devastated now. We missed so much. Finally, an honest sentence. Yes, I answered softly. You did. Victoria stepped forward carefully then. I should have noticed. God, that one almost broke me. Because unlike my parents, she actually sounded sincere, not defensive, not performative, ashamed. I was so wrapped up in my own life, she whispered. I never asked how you were surviving. No, I agreed quietly. You didn't. Silence settled over all four of us. Heavy, complicated. Dad looked at the Whitfield medallion resting against my gown, then at the gold sash, then finally directly at me. And for the first time in my entire life, my father looked intimidated by me. Not angry, not dismissive, intimidated. What do you want from us? He asked quietly. Interesting question. Because deep down, he still believed this moment operated like a negotiation. Damage exchanged for conditions. I thought about it honestly, about the years of rejection. The holidays alone, the ramen dinners, the cracked laptop. Then I realized something strange. I didn't want revenge, not anymore. I don't want anything, I answered. Dad looked genuinely stunned. What? I spent 4 years learning how to build a life without needing your approval. God. That sentence changed the air around us completely. Because suddenly, the power dynamic my parents spent decades controlling disappeared. Not through screaming, through independence. Mom started crying again, real crying this time. Not graceful tears, grief. I see you now, she whispered. God, too late. That's the tragedy nobody talks about enough. Sometimes people finally recognize your value only after you've learned to survive without them. And honestly, that recognition feels emptier than you expect. I looked around the reception lawn slowly. Students hugging families, parents taking photos, faculty congratulating graduates. Then back at my own family standing in stunned silence around me. And for the first time, I understood something clearly. I had spent 18 years trying to become someone my parents would finally choose proudly. But standing there beneath sunlight and applause, I realized the girl they overlooked no longer existed anymore. And the woman standing in her place didn't need to beg for love ever again. I moved to New York 2 weeks after graduation. Tiny studio apartment. One narrow window facing a brick wall, kitchen barely larger than a closet, and honestly, I had never loved a place more. Because every inch of it belonged to a life I built myself. No family money, no rescue plan, no last-minute parental support, just me. The first few months at Morrison & Associates were brutal, 80-hour work weeks. Endless spreadsheets, corporate clients who spoke in numbers and expectations. But after surviving 4 years on 4 hours of sleep and emotional neglect, financial consulting felt surprisingly manageable. Rebecca visited during my second month. She walked into my apartment, stared around dramatically, then announced, "This place is aggressively tiny. It's Manhattan. I think your bathroom is technically illegal." God. I laughed so hard I nearly cried. She hugged me afterward while standing between my couch and refrigerator because there literally wasn't space elsewhere. "You did it, Frankie." Simple sentence. Massive feeling. Because for years my life revolved around surviving. Now suddenly I was living. Victoria called more often after graduation. At first our conversations felt awkward, careful, like strangers trying to remember they were sisters. But slowly something real started forming between us for the first time in our lives. One night over coffee, she admitted something quietly. "I used to think Dad loved us equally." I stirred my drink silently. "He didn't." "No," Victoria looked down. "I just benefited from it enough not to notice." God, that sentence mattered more than any apology could have, because accountability without defensiveness is rare, especially in families built around denial. "I'm sorry," she whispered, and honestly, for the first time I believed her. Mom wrote me letters, actual handwritten letters, 3 pages sometimes, apologies, memories, regrets. One line stayed with me longer than the others. I kept telling myself we treated you equally because admitting otherwise made me feel like a bad mother. God, that one hurt, because it was true. People protect themselves from guilt by minimizing damage constantly, and children pay the price for that comfort. I didn't answer immediately, not to punish her, because healing required honesty now, and honesty takes time. Dad took longer, of course he did. Harold Townsend built his entire identity around being correct. Successful, respected, in control. Admitting he failed his daughter fundamentally threatened all of that. Then 6 months after graduation, he called. I almost let it go to voicemail. Almost. Hello, silence first, then, thank you for answering. God, my father sounded tired, not physically, emotionally tired. Like guilt had finally started settling into places pride used to live. I wasn't sure I would, I admitted. That's fair. We sat in silence for several seconds. Then Dad inhaled shakily once. I've been trying to figure out what to say since graduation. Interesting, because for most of my life, words came easily to him, especially painful ones. I keep coming up empty. I leaned back slowly against my kitchen counter. Then just say something true. Silence again. Then finally, I was wrong. God, I actually closed my eyes because I never expected to hear those words from him, not once. I was wrong about your potential, wrong about your value, wrong about the way I treated you. His voice cracked slightly, and I don't know how to fix it. Interesting. For the first time in his life, my father wasn't speaking like a man with authority. He sounded like a parent who finally understood consequences. You can't fix 4 years, I answered quietly. I know, you can't undo what you said. Another silence. I know, God, that mattered, not excuses, not justification, recognition, simple painful recognition. Then Dad whispered something that stayed with me permanently. You were never the child who needed less love. I stopped breathing for a second because suddenly everything became horrifyingly clear. I wasn't overlooked because I lacked value. I was overlooked because I appeared self-sufficient. Quiet children get abandoned emotionally all the time because adults mistake silence for strength. God, that realization healed and destroyed something inside me simultaneously. I needed you too, I whispered. Dad started crying then, not loud, dramatic crying, quiet, devastated crying, the kind older men usually save for funerals. I know, he said, I know now. It wasn't forgiveness, not fully. But it was the first honest conversation we'd ever had. And honesty changes things. 2 years later, my life barely resembled the one I left behind. Promoted twice at Morrison. MBA program fully sponsored by the firm. New apartment with actual sunlight. Rebecca still called me Frankie. Victoria and I met monthly for coffee. Mom kept writing letters even after I finally started answering them. Dad tried, awkwardly, imperfectly, but genuinely. And honestly, that mattered more than polished apologies ever could. Last spring, I donated $10,000 anonymously to Eastbrook's scholarship fund for students without family financial support. When Rebecca found out, she burst into tears immediately. You're changing someone's life. God, maybe, but really someone changed mine first. Dr. Smith, Rebecca, the Whitfield Foundation. People who saw value in me before I fully saw it myself. Sometimes I still think about that graduation stage. The sunlight, the applause, my father's face when he realized the daughter he dismissed had become someone impossible to ignore. But strangely, that's not the moment that stays with me most anymore. It's the night after the college rejection conversation. Me sitting alone on my bedroom floor beside a cracked laptop searching scholarships at 2:00 a.m. Terrified, heartbroken, certain I wasn't enough. I wish I could go back and tell that girl something. Not that success was coming. Not that someday people would finally recognize her worth, something more important. I'd tell her this. Your value does not decrease just because someone failed to see it. And honestly, that changed everything. Before you go, subscribe and comment. Do you think some parents mistake quiet children for children who need less love? And remember, the people who survive alone the longest are often the ones who needed support the most.